Good morning and afternoon to students, teachers, panelists, and others. Waitka, welcome to the second annual Canadian Marine Careers Foundation School District 83 Quatsit Canals Naysakwamitmikulu Career Exploration Series featuring the marine industry. Before I get to the introductions, I wish to acknowledge this webinar panel discussion is hosted on the traditional and ceded territory of the Secwepemc people, to which we now call Salmon Arm. I know I feel grateful for being here on Secwepemc. Had a wonderful walk this morning along the waterfront with limited breeze and nice crisp temperatures out there. I also wish to acknowledge literally the dozens of other Indigenous groups that exist on the territories that are covered by this broadcast. Many BC public and independent school districts are participating in this event. I know we can say hello to the good folks in Revelstoke, Chilliwack, Prince George. I noticed North Delta Secondary has signed on as well, Maple Ridge, and of course, folks within our district. I'm your host and moderator, George Richard. Glad you're here. I am School District 83's Career Education Coordinator. To talk more about the Foundation, or CMCF, here is the Executive Director, Julia Fields. She's coming to us directly from Ottawa this morning. Good morning, or in your case, I guess, Julia, good afternoon.
Good morning, George. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. I just want to talk a little bit about the Canadian Marine Careers Foundation. We are a national nonprofit organization, and we work with marine stakeholders across the country to raise awareness about the many marine careers that exist and their training pathways. And we have a fantastic resource, an online portal called imagine-marine.ca. And this is a one-stop shop, so to speak, where you can find out everything you need to know about the many careers and roles and responsibilities within the marine transportation sector. There are some fantastic interactive resources such as day-in-the-life videos, information about different training programs, bursaries and scholarships, Q&As with marine professionals. And we have a national jobs board where marine employers post their latest openings. So I encourage you to come and check it out, explore, and even contact us if you have any questions through the website, and we'd be happy to help you with your journey. Before we get started, I just want to give you a little bit of context about the marine transportation sector. So the sector actually employs about 100,000 people across the country, and many of those jobs are in places where there's water, of course. So in the Atlantic Canada, the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence region, the Arctic, and the West Coast. But there are roles across the whole country. And there are many different kinds of careers and many different kinds of workplaces. So you could be working on a vessel, whether that's recreational, cargo vessel in Canada, a tug and barge, or a ferry. Or you could be working in a port and terminal operation, in a shipyard for a federal government department, such as the Canadian Coast Guard, the Royal Canadian Navy, or Transport Canada, in a research lab, in a technology center. There really is a place for everyone in the marine sector, no matter what your interest is. And one thing to note is that 43% of our workforce is retiring over the next 10 years. So we have a lot of opportunities and roles that are opening up and a lot of opportunity to progress your career. So thank you for coming to listen today to our speakers, and I will pass it back to George.
Okay, thanks a lot, Julia. Some housekeeping administrative items for today's session. For teachers and students, please always leave your mic off and cameras off. We just want to make sure there's no background noise, or we also want to protect your privacy during the 75-minute session. We are recording this session, so if you must leave early, for those who have registered, you will get a copy of this sent to you, and you can play it back for the parts you haven't seen. If a student or teacher does have a question, we would ask you to write that in the chat. I will then be able to read it out to our panelists to respond to, and you can write your question at any time. We may not be able to answer that question right away. We'll definitely get to it by the end of this broadcast when we get and finish all the presentations. And still feel free, if you join us, to please put what school you're coming from, how many students are there, all that sort of stuff. You're welcome to put that in the chat right now. So now we're going to turn to our panelists. We're going to be doing this one at a time and hearing their stories before going to the next speaker. So, speaker number one, Kevin Linkletter. Kevin started off in the marine industry in 2000 while attending Georgian College in Barrie, Ontario. Over the last 24 years, he has focused primarily on the sales side of the business, working at the dealership level and wholesaler manufacturing. Welcome to the program, Kevin.
Thank you very much for having me today. This is a great opportunity to share some information on the marine industry and the career path I've taken. I know nothing like this was available when I got into the industry, but yeah, it's just it's nice to be here today. Was the video going to play at the beginning or the end? I don't know.
Oh, it's up to you.
Okay. Maybe if we just get we'll get this video rolling just kind of as an intro here to the marine industry as a whole. So we'll watch the video and then I'll carry on.
Great. All right. Apologies, bit of a sound issue.
So that was a quick snapshot of the 85 years history that Mercury has been in business and supporting the marine industry, and that's the company I work for. And what I'd like to do is share my journey on how I got from where you are today in the seat in high school to a career in the marine industry. So I started out in Barrie, Ontario. Well, is where I went to Georgian College. I didn't really know what I wanted to do as far as a career goes at that point. And while I was at Georgian College, it was a co-op program, and I took advantage of that. And there was an opportunity. This dealership I'd drive by on the bus going to Georgian College. I'd see this dealership and I thought it was a pretty neat place to work. So I approached them for one of the co-op placements in college, and that's kind of how the ball started rolling for me. I started there in parts and started out, I guess I'm going to say it was probably about $8 an hour at the time, or $8.50, which would probably be equivalent to $20 in today. Not dating myself too bad, but so you start out at an entry level position there, and I learned the industry, and that's half the battle is learning what you want to do. So so I started out there, worked there part-time while I was going to school, and I was taking a business administration program, general program at Georgian College, and learning about HR and marketing and advertising. And you're taking these courses and they're all interesting at the time when you're taking them for the first time, and you don't really know how you're going to apply them. Well, the manager at the dealership kind of kept on giving me more projects and asked me if I knew how to do marketing, and so I started looking after advertising and doing ads, and then one thing led to another. The dealer wanted they had to do an HR. They needed an HR team at the dealership, and which is human resource and health and safety. So I was learning about that in school, so I applied that, and one thing led to another. I just kept on applying more stuff I was learning at school. And so basically, I guess at the end of the day, what I'd like to share with you is, you're going to come across some stepping stones in your life, whether it's going to school and college, and also in your career. So I would say, learn these stepping stones, focus on the areas that you'd really like to, focus on, and have fun doing it. So as I was working through, it was, learning more about the industry, and at the dealership, an opportunity came up to work for Durrell International, which is a boat manufacturer. So I ended up going that path, and while I was finishing school, just kind of to tie in, where education is important, I ended up, sorry, I'm just getting a little stumbled up here, but just one second there. So yeah, once I'm working through the program and finished Georgian College, that's kind of where the opportunities really opened up for me in the marine industry. My boss at the time asked me where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, and I told him I wanted to focus on the marine sales side of things. So he ended up putting me in the sales side of the business, and I was managing the inventory levels and everything at the dealership. So once you finish school, it's kind of opens up the door and some more opportunities. So and sorry, I'm just a little jumbled up here. So as my career progressed in the marine industry, I ended up moving from Barrie, Ontario, and it opened a door to Harborcraft Boats, which is based in Vernon, British Columbia. And I kind of took that career to another level, going from a dealership to a boat manufacturing facility, which exposes you to a whole nother level of business, which of manufacturing, which is kind of neat. So and from there, you learn a little bit more about on how the product's built and distribution. So that's kind of where a lot of my schooling came into play, learning more about marketing and business, and bringing a product to market is kind of really where that came about. And they're all kind of going back to the stepping stones. I stayed at that job for about 7 years, and it worked quite well. Sorry, it's not. Yeah, and sorry, I'm just need from Kingfisher Boats, I had another opportunity to work at a dealership in the marine industry in Salmon Arm, and so you learn, I'd learned a little bit about managing a dealership and supplying engines to the retail consumer at that point. And then today here I am at Mercury Marine, and today what I do primarily at this point is I manage sales territory for Western Canada, which I ended up basically any of the boat dealerships that sell Mercury product. I provide assistance with them on their day-to-day business, on how to promote and market and deliver a product to the retail consumer. So That's kind of a little bit of history on not diving too deep into how what my background is, but I guess the biggest thing is going back to the stepping stones. The biggest thing is kind of figure out where you want to go as far as school. And if you don't know when you start, a business program definitely helped me because I didn't plan on ending up in the marine industry, but it gave me the tools to head in the right direction there. And yeah, just it opened the door, and I really enjoy the marine industry. The biggest thing that I get to do on a day-to-day basis, not only is it fun, you get to drive boats, and in the background here, there's a pair of engines, 400 horsepower engines on the back of a pontoon boat. You get to have fun when you're doing it. And it's a fast-paced environment as far as if you're into that. Some people don't necessarily like fast-paced environments, but I do, and there's new challenges every day. So you get to problem solve and come up with solutions that you typically wouldn't an average job you don't get exposed to. So and then the other thing that I really enjoy about the marine industry is you get to travel and do trade shows, and it's I think it's always changing. But some of the challenges that I end up coming across in the job, like any job, is it's market conditions and everything else, which can be you just have to adapt to different climates and areas of business. But yeah, so that's just to give you an idea on working conditions. So obviously currently I work from home, so I manage a sales territory, which gives you a little bit of freedom. It's kind of nice having a hybrid work environment. Mine's definitely more hybrid than anything. Work from home 100% and travel, so it gives you a little bit more freedom. And so I'm obviously at home, but I also travel in Western Canada, and and you're indoor, outdoor. So it's the nice thing is it's always changing. You're not doing the same thing day in, day out. And at the end of the day, on the sales and the recreational boating industry side, you end up supplying a product to people that enriches their lives. And a lot of people, I don't know if obviously you're tuned into the marine industry program here today. The biggest thing that I think that we're all connected with is being on a boat or in the marine industry. There's not too many jobs out there that you can create memories for people, but you can definitely do that in the marine industry, whether you're out on the water making a difference, as a police officer or Coast Guard. You definitely can make a difference in a lot of people's lives, whether you're providing recreational fun or safety. So it's definitely something that I really enjoy doing. So just to circle back around, to get to where to a higher level sales position or management position in the marine industry. Definitely one of the requirements that you're going to need is post-secondary education, whether it's through a college or university. Pretty much any major company or corporation is required to have that these days. And also the biggest thing is continuing your education. I know through the company I work for now, Mercury Marine, we offer or Mercury offers or Brunswick Corporation offers continuous learning, so they'll pay. And I'm actually working toward my MBA at this point right now to take my career to another level eventually. If you want to. It's a great opportunity for in a company paying for that. They want the best educated people on staff to make the best decisions he possibly can. So all I can say is, make sure that you look at your opportunities in school, and use stepping stones to get where you need to go. Learn as much as you can from as you move along from each job or person for that matter, mentor to get where you need to go. And I think focus is one of the key things that you really need to do. Once you kind of get a direction or an idea you want to go in the marine industry, focus on that and learn as much as you can. And I would say, have as much fun as you can. We all have to work for a long time in our lives, so make sure you make sure you have something fun you enjoy doing, and it doesn't seem like work at the end of the day. So I think that's. Is there anything else that I should touch on there, George, or is that?
Well, I'll throw out a couple of questions to you. One of them, it won't be from left field, but this one is kind of a reaffirmation of what you said. And what I find really interesting is for basically your career, you were, for all intent and purpose, landlocked, for all intent and purpose. Like, you were not necessarily doing your career at the coast. And I know for somebody that, we're by a lake, of course, large lakes within the BC interior, but that's a really interesting point, that you don't necessarily have to have a fulfilling marine career being on the West Coast or the East Coast or the Arctic or the Great Lakes. It can be inland, and you can find those opportunities.
Absolutely, and that's starting in Barrie, and I live in the big city of Grindrod, British Columbia right now, and I've managed to travel across Canada. I've boated in almost every province across majority of the provinces I've gone boating in, and or I've traveled to. There's only two places I haven't been that the marine industry's taken me, and that's Labrador and Nunavut. I've been everywhere else, and all over Canada and the U.S. and even took me to Russia. So it's the opportunities are what you make them, right?
For sure. And this one, like I say, if you don't have the stats off the top of your head, totally understand, because I haven't done this. But in respect to the inland marine industry, like, how large is this in respect to either a GDP, gross domestic product, or people working in the industry, or sales that you have with Mercury, or anything along that lines? Like, how big is this?
Yeah, so it's I don't have that number right. I didn't have that number prepared for this meeting, but from a standpoint, the largest areas for like interior, there's a huge marine industry opportunity in the interior of British Columbia. We've got the Okanagan Lake, Shuswap Lake, Kootenay Lake, and there's a ton of recreational and commercial operations that take place on those bodies of water. And a lot of large marine facilities, dealerships that there's a lot of opportunities. And like I said, whether it's a retail or commercial side, there's a lot of opportunities at those dealerships, and they're willing to take new employees, and all the trainings there, and opportunities exist. So you don't necessarily have to live at the coast. Definitely there's a bigger body of water there, but there's opportunities everywhere. Even, believe it or not, even in Alberta, in the prairies, there's opportunities there too as well. But less water, and the weather's much nicer in British Columbia.
Don't you know it? Hey, Kevin, thank you very much for your presentation. Much appreciated. I would encourage the people that are watching, of course, students and teachers, to put your questions in the chat if you do have one. We go to our second speaker now, Kirstin Eidsvik, has been a seafarer on the BC coast for almost 20 years. Her background varies from fisheries research, commercial fishing, over 15 years with the Canadian Coast Guard, and now as a mate on a ship docking tugs. She loves to share her enthusiasm of the BC coast and driving every kind of ship she can. And she truly believes that working at sea can be a rewarding career for anyone that wants it. Thanks for joining the seminar today, Kirstin.
Yeah, I'm super happy to be here. I'm coming at you guys from the territory of the Haisla First Nation here in Kitimat. I'm actually talking to you guys today from the bridge of the tugboat that I'm working on. It's called the High Sea Weegat. It's pretty space agey looking, I know, but so yeah, my name is Kirstin Eidsvik, obviously as introduced. I've been out working on boats for 20 years. I'm a mate, so that's second in command to the captain. And oh yeah, it's in Kitimat. That's where the tugboat's docked right now. Yeah, I've been on mate on ships for the last 10 years. And the interesting thing is I originally came from Prince Rupert, but I spent a very large part of my life in Vernon, BC. So I was kind of excited to hear that some folks are from around there. Yeah, so how does a kid that was a fine arts student living in Vernon, BC end up working on ships on the coast for 20 years? It's kind of crazy. So I'm excited to tell you guys about my little career journey. Originally coming out of high school, I was a bit of a fine arts student. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my career. My options kind of seemed to be to get a student loan, go to school for 4 years, get a college degree or university degree, or just kind of do seasonal jobs and just see what I could do with my life through that. I had a family visit over on Salt Spring Island where I ran into some folks that were running a Coast Guard ship. And it was a fisheries research ship, and I'm a bit of a fish nerd, so I was pretty excited to meet them. And they told me about a deckhand program that you can go to. There's institutions all around the country where you can go do what's called a bridge watch rating. And I'd been on and off of EI at the time, so I talked to my EI counselor, and they mentioned that there was funding available for me to take the program if I wanted to, which was exciting because I didn't make a lot of money at the time. The Bridge Watch rating is a 3-month program. I think at the time it was probably close to $2,500. I chose the school that was in North Vancouver, and so I went for it. Had no idea whether I was going to get a job or not. Didn't know where I was going to work. I lived in Abbotsford at the time. And I went for 3 months in the program, graduated, and 2 weeks later I was I'd applied to the Coast Guard because that's kind of my primary interest. And 2 weeks after the program, I ended up being flown up to a ship in Prince Rupert and getting to join as a deckhand for the first time, which, yeah, it's hard to believe that was 16 years ago. I was a deckhand on Coast Guard ships for about 6 years. I worked on fisheries research boats and more of like a marine civil infrastructure boat, which was basically a construction site on a ship, which was really interesting because I had no construction background whatsoever. I ended up having to learn on my feet quite a bit. It was pretty interesting to see what opportunities kind of presented themselves after time. So after about 6 years, I started getting pressure from a lot of my coworkers that were saying, Kirstin, you should have a look at either becoming an officer or maybe a deck boss, or, maybe you'd be interested in engineering as well, which I found fascinating. I wished that I could clone myself at the time and have done both. I decided that I was going to go over and advance myself and go and get my watchkeeping mate ticket, which is to be a navigation officer on the ship and eventually into a captain, which was, I thought that would be a pretty cool little career path. So I went to school. Now, when I was a deckhand, I think my wage was about $40,000 to $60,000 a year, which wasn't a ton of money at the time. But my pay bump, if I knew that I went to school and graduated and then got a job as a mate, was going to go up to about $90,000 to $120,000 a year, with more money after that if I ended up becoming a captain. So I was pretty interested in that for the money. But also the ship schedule was really interesting. I worked month on, month off, 12-hour shifts when I was on board the ships. And that time on was pretty interesting, but it also, the time off really afforded me a lot of freedom in travel and being able to live and work wherever I kind of wanted, because I only had to join the ship once a month. So I had a lot of friends that lived in Rossland that were skiers. We had crew that lived in the Philippines that would come over. They'd visit their family there and then come back. There were people that just traveled all the time, which was really thrilling to me as a 20-year-old. But as my career went on and everything, and I became a watchkeeping mate, I settled down. I moved to Victoria, where I currently live. And yeah, I ended up working based out of Victoria primarily, and where most of our Canadian Coast Guard ships on the West Coast crew out of. And yeah, and actually, yeah, I shouldn't leave out this lovely tugboat here, because most of my career was based in Coast Guard. But after about 10 years of going to sea as a mate, I was kind of interested in seeing something else. And I had some friends in the towing industry. There's a lot of opportunities in ship docking, and lots of new boats being built on the coast. And a friend of mine told me about the job here. And they mentioned that they would train me to drive these tugboats. And these tugboats are amazing high performance machines. They've got amazing horsepower. They're unbelievable. Like, I can maneuver it to within feet or inches of an object. And it's really exciting to drive. So that was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. And so here I am now. For the job details, it's kind of depends on the boat that you're working on. As a deckhand, basically, I would wake up on a Coast Guard ship, and we could be anywhere on the coast doing any sort of job, and you just kind of had to adapt as the day went on. You do have some routines. As a mate now, I have some decent daytime routines. I make sure that I check the weather, I check the tides, I check whether we need to do any maintenance that day, and kind of what the needs of everybody on the ship are, as well as what the ship needs to do that day. I'm primarily indoors now, but I spent a lot of my formative years working out on deck in all sorts of weather on the BC coast. Right now, I don't know if you can see, but there's some lovely sea smoke going on. It's pretty chilly out there. But we got, there's always a good saying that it's not bad weather, it's bad gear. And we always had really good equipment for being outside and working outside. Pros and cons of the job were definitely working away. It's a little bit of a challenge to maintain some normal human relationships when you go away to sea. But the nice thing about being home is you can be present for that whole time. I had lots of opportunity to meet friends and go away on vacation with them. I'd go see family and help babysit new nieces and nephews and stuff. And when you're home, you really get to be all there, which is pretty nice. So I've really valued that over the years. What else have we got here? I think I had a couple of videos there. Anna, is there any chance that we could play I've got a little clip from the last time I was out training in Vancouver Harbor. It's just a quick one. It was a little time lapse. I was pretty stressed out because I was learning a lot, so I didn't get a lot of footage, but just kind of gives you an idea of what ship docking tugs do. Yeah, if I could wait. Yeah, so this is just a little time lapse. So I'm the tug that's on the stern of this ship. They had just finished loading, I think it was grain, and they just needed, ships when they come into port, they just need a little bit of extra help to get into the berth. They're not super maneuverable, so that's what tugboats do. And it ended up turning around and heading out. I think it was on its way to Korea after that. So, and here's some photos of me on the bridge of the tug. They're pretty amazing. You can see pretty much all 360 degrees around you, and it's like a little spaceship to some degree, except you're on the water and you get to go home at the end of the day. I don't really have much other than that. In conclusion, it's kind of funny because a lot of people think that you need to live on the coast to work in the marine industry. And with the way that the work often is on and off, you can pretty much work and live anywhere. And I always kind of thought that you had to be this big burly person to be able to work on ships, but I don't know, you can't really tell, but I'm 5'3" and like 120 pounds. I'm not a big person, and you know, I've made it this far, and I'm working on my next ticket, which is a 500-ton master's ticket, so that I can be a captain. And yeah, there's lots of opportunities out there, and I think that working at sea can be for pretty much anybody that wants to do it. You just got to have the enthusiasm for it. I definitely did, and that got me pretty far. So thank you guys very much for your time. It's much appreciated.
No worries, Kirstin. That was a great share there. I know Amy has two questions. The first one, I would ask everybody to make sure on the panelists to take a look at it, and I'd like to answer that near the end of our presentation. But her second one, where do you go to school to be a deckhand? You would probably be the expert. From what I recall, maybe BCIT might be one of those places, I think, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a few I know of in Vancouver, so there's BCIT in North Vancouver, and then there's one over in Ladysmith, I believe, or just north of Ladysmith on the island. But there's places all over Canada that you can take the training if you've got family members there or something like that. So
yeah, and Antoine wanted to know if you plan to be a Marine pilot.
That never came up until probably a few years ago, and I've been asked by a lot of people actually. It's definitely on my radar, but there's a lot of training that needs to go into it, and I've got a lot of BC coastal knowledge on my side, which is pretty exciting, but I do have to get a few more tickets and a lot of master's experience to get there, but it's on my radar for sure.
Okay, and I thank Greg Seed and his students at JL Jackson in Salmon Arm for this. I was actually a question I was wondering about. Does a 500-ton master ticket that you're going for mean you get to pilot a bigger tugboat?
Yeah. Yeah, that's correct. The one that I'm on right now is actually just under 500 tons, but I've got a master 150-ton, and it's not quite enough. It would be about maybe a 70-foot fish boat equivalent kind of thing. So a little smaller.
Little smaller. Regardless, Kirstin, once again, thank you very much for sharing. I would encourage anyone to put your questions in the chat if you have one. We'll try and get to it later on. I know that there is a hand that is written. We're not going to be taking verbal questions at this point. Hopefully you can write that in to the chat. We turn to Jason Michell. Growing up primarily on Vancouver Island, Jason's career is predominantly focused on the port, transportation, and logistics industry. He recently earned an MBA in executive management and a certificate in Asian Pacific trade and investment from Royal Roads University. He's now the vice president of business development at the Port of Nanaimo, where he engages with local, regional, and national governments, community groups, and industry stakeholders to bring visibility to import, export, and tourism opportunities for Nanaimo. So the floor is yours, Jason.
Hi, good morning, and thank you, George, and thank you to the Marine Careers Foundation and everybody that joined. I'm joining you from Nanaimo, which is on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. I'd like to recognize our ability to work, live, and play here. I thought I'd start off, I was asked to speak from the heart, so I figured I'd throw up some family photos and some history about myself to get started. Grew up primarily in BC, started out in northern BC. I'm the son of a lumber guy. So my dad worked in a lot of mills across British Columbia. So we moved from Mackenzie, BC to Tassus for a number of years, from Tassus to Campbell River, Ladysmith, Duncan, Victoria. And then out of high school, had some fun up in Banff for a short stint. Having had all that fun on the West Coast, I just developed a real love for the water. And I think it's just never, ever left me. Coming out of high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do to grow up, to be completely honest. And I just had an idea of where I wanted to be. And I loved the West Coast and I loved Victoria. I've got a lot of family history in Victoria. So I ended up starting actually at Viking Air. At Viking Air, I was, spent 2 or 3 years making airplane parts for beavers, de Havillands, otters, on a router machine, on CNC mills, CNC lathes, all just training at Viking Air. It was training they provided us. But for me, it just didn't have a great deal of pay, to be completely honest. I didn't see it getting me to where I wanted to be in life. So I kind of morphed into meeting a woman. And then this lady and her dad was in the marine industry. So I ended up at Viking Air and got interested in what her dad did. And then they shortly transitioned into working at a shipping terminal in Cowichan Bay. And in Cowichan Bay, I think if you want to flip to the next slide, in Cowichan Bay, I started out working on the shipping terminals, and I started moving cargo on and off the docks as a basically a controller. So we would bring in the cargo from Western Forest Products or lumber, and we'd work with the mills. We'd tally the cargo. We'd order labor, the ILWU. We would work with the ILWU to repair equipment. I was basically a manager at that point, and I learned a lot from the folks in the business. But I myself at that point in time didn't have any training, so I started basically on the ground, payroll, moving cargoes, and this kind of thing, bringing in lumber. Part is developing on a shipping terminal. At a shipping terminal, it's not just understanding that there's terminal operations, but there's ship operations. So in the marine industry and in trade, there's the cargo on the terminal, and then there's the stevedore work. So the terminal work is when you take cargoes, you receive them into a shipping terminal, which takes longshoremen, lots of safety training, forklift tickets, first aid, workplace hazardous material stuffs. These are kind of some basic trainings that you get on a terminal. And then basically a terminal operation takes the cargo, receives it, and then delivers it to the hook. At the hook, then basically the people on the ship take over, which is called stevedoring. So the stevedores are also longshoremen. They also have rigging training. And what people might not know is that ship's crew don't load a ship. The actual longshoremen load the ship. The crew of 20 to 21 on a standard cargo ship actually make sure that the vessel is ready to go, that the cranes work, that it's in sailing condition, and they move it from point to point. But when they arrive in BC, the stevedores take over the loading of the vessel and the discharge of the vessel. So where I started out was kind of on the shipping terminals, and then I shifted a bit to starting to work on the docks and then on the ships as a superintendent. So as a superintendent, I'd manage the longshoremen from project cargoes like you see the windmill blades there. Those came in and went up to Cape Scott on Vancouver Island. The ship on the right, that's as you can see, a container ship. Logs, scrap steel. We would do all sorts of different commodities, and with each of those commodities, you learned a lot. You learned a lot about working with the longshoremen. You learned a lot about safety. I had to take harness training because one of the jobs we had was actually loading man lifts into hatches, because when ships come into Vancouver and they're switching from grain to coal or different commodities, we actually would load the hatches with man lifts, and then we would put our fall arrest gear on and scrape the hatches down. So there's just a lot of different work. It's not just cargo and commodities moving in and out. It was actually cleaning vessel holds. So that was very interesting work. So if we can maybe go to the next slide. So what you can see is the safety was a big piece of what we do, but it's also recognizing the opportunities that can come from that. So in the bottom side there, what you're seeing is a log ship that actually sailed out of Washington State, went out into the ocean, and shortly after leaving, actually the deck load shifted. So part of a job that we had to do was to find a safe way to discharge those logs at Ogden Point in Victoria, and then they had to come to the dock, and we worked with C-SPAN. So we work a lot with a lot of different partners. We work with C-SPAN, we work with Transport Canada through that. You'd work with Coast Guard, you work with all these different organizations to find a safe way to manage that kind of an incident. And then out of that comes opportunity, right? So how you choose to manage the operation after. So once we had the logs all cleaned up, we had all this bark all over the dock. We didn't really know what to do with it. So we thought, hey, let's grind it all up and then do a charity event. So we ended up selling bark mulch and making something like $15,000 for the Mustard Seed Foundation. We cleaned it all up and then gave that money off to Mustard Seed. It brought out all sorts of volunteers from our organization, the Longshoremen. It brought a lot of people together. So I have to recognize that culture of safety, and it's a big piece of what we do. So having the proper training in rigging, in fall arrest, and all sorts of different things is something that we really value, making sure our partners have the same culture. Next slide, please. So moving from after working on the shipping terminals, and then as a stevedore, you're outside a lot, right? You're working on the deck of ships day to night. It's demanding work. The longshoremen you work with, you have to have toolbox talks, make sure they have all the gear and the equipment, make sure the equipment's ready, and you work with all the different organizations to organize a job like that. So after doing that, I was offered a job with the Port Authority of Nanaimo. And the Port Authority of Nanaimo is actually one of 17 port authorities in the country. It's recognized as a government organization, but it's actually not financially supported by the government. We have to raise our own funds to support our docks, construction, and maintenance. So I ended up coming to the port because we lost the contract. So I worked for a contractor who runs the port. It's very complicated. So the ports basically are run by private contractors. And when I worked for Western Stevedoring SSA, we lost that contract at Cow Bay and we lost it at Nanaimo. So what ended up happening is DP World took over that contract. And when that happened, the Port Authority offered me a job. They saw the work that I did on the ships and on the docks, and they said, hey, we'd like you to come work for us. And obviously that sounded like a fabulous opportunity. So I took that opportunity. When I started, I was managing the shipping terminals. So what I would do is make sure that the civil works were good, that the cranes were operating properly, that the docks and the pilings and all the infrastructure that a port needs, the lighting. So that was kind of one of my first jobs when I came to the Port Authority, was making sure that the infrastructure was running properly. I didn't have the training to work with engineers, but I worked with a lot of them. I worked with electrical engineers. I'd work with civil engineers. I work with all sorts of different folks who are experienced in their fields. But my job was more to coordinate them to make sure that the shipping terminals are properly run. So that's kind of the shift that I made from terminal operations and stevedore work and the actual cargo movements, and then moving into the port. And part of that job with the port is also the infrastructure funding. So in order to build big new terminals, like you can see in the top there, we basically, those warehouses were converted from what were once lumber and pulp sheds to now actually an auto import facility. So a lot of the industry in Nanaimo has shifted from lumber, logs, traditional forest products, and we've had to find new things to do. And that's part of what my job is working with international trade partners and governments to find out how can Nanaimo help support the supply chain and transportation industry here in BC. So, and I know it sounds complex, which is kind of leading me to my next point, which is I realized at this point that in order to do this job, I needed better education. I actually had no post-secondary education coming out of high school, and now I was getting to a point where I'm working with governments, engineers, politicians to fill out funding applications for massive projects in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So I went back to school, and the port was kind enough to help support me in that, and they put me through a master's, and I actually took it. It's executive management, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what I don't know. I learned a lot about international trade, marketing, international business. And then I was fortunate as part of that schooling as a certificate in Asia Pacific. So if we flip to the next slide, I started to then realize the value of international trade and international relationships. So I've been fortunate to go from the ground level of loading ships and discharging ships and managing terminals to then building terminals and being able to work with very experienced, skilled people, to then actually into that international trade piece where I was fortunate to go to Japan and meet with the Japanese government. I was fortunate to go on Canadian trade missions to South Korea. So I'm reading the list of questions that I was asked to try to interpret and help people understand. And I think that I think the sense of kind of things that I do, I've given that. What do I like about my job? I can make a difference. I think the ports, we in Canada are 17 billion in economic output. There's an 8 billion direct GDP impact. We have to work safely in our environment to make sure that our marine and our infrastructure projects take fish habitat, environmental interests to heart. We make sure that the oil spills in the harbor are hopefully non-existent. And we make sure that there's job and economic opportunity. So I'm very fortunate to be able to work with government, with industry groups, with the longshoremen directly, with Transport Canada. I mean, it's a pretty fortunate job. I also get to travel. Vietnam, Tokyo, South Korea trade missions. I've been able to see the world and see from their perspective what Canada's like. What do they see Canada as? How do we support them? Challenges? every day, I think is fair to say. It's a very dynamic workplace. We work with all sorts of different folks. There's climate change, fires, floods that shut down the transportation system. And I worked on the national team that helped try to restart that. Um, there's a challenge every day. And I think that's part of what I love about it too. Is it's a challenge, yeah, but it's also an opportunity. So I'm a very win-win kind of situation. The environment now is indoors. I think that's the last question here is it's indoors. I work in an office primarily now. I travel a fair bit. But I think I'll stop there and ask if there's any questions. I know that's a lot. I do apologize if it's too much, other than I think I've touched on this. My son, I'm a hockey coach. I coach BC minor hockey. When I had Father's Day, I took him on board a ship and he got to go meet the ship's crew. He got to go meet the superintendent, the supercargos. And I think passing this along to this group as well is what I would say is it's very rewarding work. It's very fulfilling work. It's a safety culture. It's an international culture. So it gives back to the community, but has the environmental components to it where you can make a difference. Anyway, that's what I have for the group, and I thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I gotta ask two real quick questions before we get back to Jane, and that is, you've done a lot of traveling on the Pacific Rim. Has it gotten it to the Atlantic Ocean at this point at all?
No, not really, but I'll give you one story. So we used to import Mercedes-Benz out of Germany. And the reason for that was Mercedes-Benz used to ship their new cars from Germany to Halifax. Those cars would go on rail and they'd move them across the country to BC on the West Coast. Interestingly, the BC VPC and the car terminal in that warehouse I showed you now that we import cars to is because they found it cheaper to move cars on ships from Germany. They would stop on the US East Coast, Carolinas, come up through the Panama Canal and into Nanaimo was actually a better trade route for them because of the California stop being such a large market. They would stop in California, the East Coast of Canada, and then move into BC. So not a lot of trade, no, in Europe. Our primary trade partner is Southeast Asia. It's generally the focus.
What I would figure. And going back to your days, on there on the docks, longshoring, stevedoring, that sort of stuff, off the top of your head, weirdest thing you found in a container that was shipped?
I didn't handle a lot of containers, but that wasn't mostly what we did, right? BC is, that's more of an import market for us. That's primarily an import market, but I never really got to see much inside of containers. But I think one of the craziest things we did, one of the most interesting operations outside the logs was actually lifting, those giant globes on the top of cruise ships that are communications tower, trying to get two forklifts underneath those when it goes like this, and the forks almost didn't fit. So you're jimmy rigging, trying to get two forklifts on either side of this giant ball without dropping this $2 million piece of equipment onto the flat deck of a truck. So yeah, you're daily challenged with interesting pieces. So that was a fun one.
No doubt. Thanks for again sharing there, Jason. We now go to our third speaker. We head to the Navy. Sailor Third Class Jane Nighswander is a naval communicator and a ship's team diver in the Royal Canadian Navy. Jane has been in the Navy since April 2023 and is currently posted at HMCS Winnipeg, or to that vessel. As a naval communicator, her role focuses on computer networking and systems administration, radio communications, marine traffic control, and encryption of codes. When not working as a communicator, Jane's secondary duty as a Navy diver includes underwater searches, jetty and hull inspections, and recovery operations. Sounds really interesting, Jane. Thanks and welcome to the seminar. And Jane will just have you go right into it if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that better?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So sorry
And
about that, guys.
yeah, and no worries. And just a reminder to folks, I know that somebody has their hand up. We only take the questions in the chat. So if you can write your questions in the chat, we'll try to get to it at the end. So thank you for that. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, I'll just get right into it. So we had our video on behalf of the Navy presented earlier, and so I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm Sailor Third Class Nighswander. I have been in the Navy for about 2 years now and am a naval communicator. I am currently hard posted to HMCS Winnipeg and attached posted to HMCS Max Bernays. And how I kind of got into the Navy position was a very interesting one. I was born and raised on a deer farm on Quadra Island, where I completed my high school education in Campbell River. I then had a big passion for fitness and people, and so I found myself doing a kinesiology degree at Camosun College, and where I then specialized in pregnancy and postpartum. And after working in the career for kind of a few years, I was kind of my early, 21, 22, and I kind of found myself lacking adventure and challenge, and I kind of wanted to completely get out of my comfort zone altogether. And actually, one of my clients had been in the British military his whole life, and he was kind of telling me about it, and I was always interested in the military. Both my grandfathers and my aunts and uncles had served in World War II, so it was always kind of a little bit of an interest point for me. And so I kind of found myself in this lull in my career and just was like, all right, well, might as well just go for it. So I joined, and here I am 2 years later. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of kind of what that journey looks like, is you go through the Canadian Armed Forces website has a very clear layout of all your steps that you need to take. I then went to basic training, which is an 8-week course in Saint-Jean, Quebec. And then after that, my NavCom trade took me right here to Victoria, BC, and Esquimalt Harbor, where then I learned kind of the foundations of a naval communicator and what they do. And then I was posted right onto a ship, and you're just kind of thrown in, and you're given lots of training, lots of mentorship. I didn't know anything at all. As I said, I had a degree in kinesiology, so I went right into working in this career I knew nothing about, and I was provided with all the resources needed and all the help needed. And still to this day, I'm always given different publications, different presentations. Learning is always a huge part of my everyday life, which keeps me on my toes and also just keeps me wanting to learn more, etc. So just to give you kind of a little bit of a touch of actually what a naval communicator does. So obviously our main focus is communications. So we are the message center of a ship, whether it be alongside or in harbor or at sea. So essentially any information that comes to the ship, it's our job to process it. And that can be from just a regular email to keeping the crew up to date. It could be a posting message of a new crew member that we are receiving, up to confidential and top secret information. So it's our job to process it, make sure it is processed correctly, encoded, decode, whatever that is, and then given off to the right people and so forth. If we need to then receive, give information to a longshore or another vessel, that is our job to do it. And the naval communicator job itself is very interesting because it almost has two branches. We have an IT and a troubleshooting side of it. And then we also have a legacy side of it. And that is kind of more your traditional, what my grandfather did in World War II, right? Your Morse code, flashing lights, your encoding, decoding, voice procedures, radio frequencies, flags, all that kind of stuff. And so it's very great in this trade is if you're an IT person or if you're a legacy person, which I have more interested in myself, there's really kind of a place for everybody. And as a naval communicator, you can find yourself mostly in the communications control room, which is like a little room with all kinds of radios and breakers and all kinds of things. And then you can also find yourself on the bridge with the captain, and your job is to make sure that you're receiving any radio frequencies or communications that are coming through that way, and then you're passing it on to the captain itself, along with fleet maneuvering and encoding and decoding. So it really gives you a very broad spectrum just from the naval communicating side. But then also you are in the Navy, and in the Navy you are a sailor first. So you're a sailor first, you're a trade second. So for instance, I was just on a sail on the Max Bernays for a week, and I found myself writing an email, and then all of a sudden I was called to the cable deck working with the bosuns, doing line handling to come alongside. And actually, it was my job to throw the line to the tugboat so we could go alongside in Vancouver. So you really find yourself in all kinds of different positions. And if you are just, if you're a trade NavCom like myself, I also found myself getting secondary training as a ship's team diver, which allows me to do underwater operations when as required for your ship. So for instance, I was just doing a poker gauge test on HMCS Winnipeg the other day, and then going into work as a NavCom. So really my job is very varied, and yes, it can be inside, but it's also very much outside, and whatever you need to do, you'll be working as a NavCom, and other times you're just associated with different trading exercises, diving, you name it, which keeps the job very exciting. So just to go into kind of the challenges, I think challenges within itself, there's kind of two components of this. One of the things is it is the military, so there is a chance, you know, we do have ships deployed right now, and things can come up, right? Something can happen with different sailors. They might need to get home. Maybe that's a family reason, medical reason. And some point you do just come to work, and you get that your superior officer tells you, yep, you have to go on a deployment for 3 months, right? And there's lots of excitement to that. It can also just lead to, you never really know what's going to happen, right? And then the other aspect is in the military, it's very go, go, go. And then I'm sure you've heard the term all hurry up and wait. So you can just be going guns a-blazing, and other times you're kind of waiting around, wondering kind of when is it the start, when is the end. But mind you, those times you can very easily fill with, again, there's so much education and courses that we are provided all the time. So there's never really a dull moment whatsoever. I'd probably say the pros to the job are also some of the challenges. You never fully know what your day is going to look like. It's very exciting. I have done things in the Navy that I never thought I'd do in my life. I've gotten the opportunity to not only be on training operations on an Arctic patrol vessel, but also just on our Orca vessels, which are training vessels, mostly for officers to learn how to command a ship and to be able to be a part of that, and just being on a small vessel and representing Canada, sailing through, the US, and then even just the local Gulf Islands here has been incredible. And then also to just do extra education whenever needed. I got asked to go on a French course. I also got asked to go into a writing course to represent as a PA officer. So it's very exciting with being able to be a part of what you signed up to do, which is a naval communicator, but then also continuously having all these opportunities to learn and get better, not be only a better sailor, but just be a better individual and gain all kinds of skills in the career side of things. George, do you have any questions, or did I kind of cover everything there?
I think that's fine, but I do want to throw out something to you in respect to communications is so important now, and especially the aspect internationally. We hear so much about miscommunication, disinformation, these bad actors in other countries, those sort of things. Do you deal with any of those aspects, even being out to sea or in port, when you're having to either intercept or assess, is this credible information that is coming to people that we're doing? Just curious.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very new myself, and I actually haven't been a part of any actual deployments, but those things happen all the time, I am sure. And just communication within itself can be very misconstrued, even when you're saying, like, even when I was on an orca training vessel, right? It's all just training, but even just communicating with other ships, right? The rules of the road, trying to make sure that everybody's on the same basis. It's at night, it's 3 a.m, people are tired, trying to make sure that everybody has the appropriate information, it is interpreted correctly, and that you're moving your ship safely, right? And so it's always just, I think the key with communication, it's especially for us in the military, it's very making sure it's as clear as possible, few words as possible, and that you are ensuring that the person has received the message correctly and it is understood very, very clearly, because if not, that's how problems can happen, right? So there's always that, even when we are doing our messaging, it's important that part of the whole procedure is we send it out, we make sure the person we send it to, it was received, and all of those things are dated and timed to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Excellent. Thanks for your insight, Jane. Much appreciated. I'll open this up to all presenters at this point because Amy earlier on asked a decent question. Amy strikes me as a learning resource teacher, possibly somewhere out there, probably inquiring about some of her students. Are there any programs for people with special needs like autism or intellectual disabilities? So I throw that out to any of the panelists based on your knowledge. Would there be any sort of careers that could be a fit in the marine industry for people that have that? I open the floor to anybody to start.
Sorry, I'll jump in quickly. I just some silence here. It's for us in this institution. It's more we rely on third-party educators, right? So we rely a lot on the local university at VIU. We rely a lot on Royal Roads and different institutions for the training. It's not something that we do in-house, but it is something we do seek externally.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Anybody else want to be able to share at this point? Anybody else? Seeing none, I know I'll go back to another question that Greg had, and this probably would go to yourself, Kirstin. We thought anybody could drive a boat or a tug. Is this not a Red Seal qualification trade? Would most tugboat captains that pull log booms need to have any or some qualification? Where do captains get qualifications? Da 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 da. So it's a number of different questions there.
Yeah, that actually kind of ties into the previous question because Transport Canada basically regulates seafarers in Canada. So any of the qualifications that you need to have are set out by them. And, you know, for me, before I could even get a job or I think even to take the Bridgewatch program, just because they want you to be able to pass, you have to take a marine medical. So there's things like they test for color blindness, they do some basic tests for fitness, they do some basic history, and there's some medical conditions that'll kind of exclude you from working at sea, obviously, because sometimes and they kind of do it as a blanket thing for people where it's like you don't know if that person's going to be working offshore, if they're going to work in a harbor. So they want to cover everybody and just say, you know, if you have something that requires you to attend medical services ashore pretty regularly, then they might not approve you for it. But it's actually like, I don't want to say the bar is low, but it's pretty accessible for a lot of people, I think. I've sailed with people with various medical conditions and stuff like that, and they still pass. So it's pretty accessible.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Jason, it looks like you put something in the chat here in respect to a link.
Yeah, it's the Western Marine Institute here in Cedar. I think that it was mentioned earlier, if I'm not mistaken. Kirstin mentioned it. So it's right down the road from where I live here. Actually, one of our ex-harbor masters is an educator at that institution. So I just thought I'd pop in the chat that one institution.
All right, good on you for doing so.
George, I can actually explain to you like the different pathways for seafarers, just so you have a better sense of things. So it depends on how big the vessel is and what type of operations it's in. But there's different paths that you can take. So You can start off sort of as a more direct to work path and get some basic safety training and marine training courses that kind of lead you into working in a more entry-level position, such as a deckhand or a cook, for instance, or in an engine assistant. So that's one way. Another way is you can go directly into becoming a marine officer in the navigation section of the vessel or the engineering part of the vessel by doing a college diploma program. And that can be between 3 to 4 years, depending on the training institution. And that's offered through colleges like Western Maritime Institute, as well as BCIT, etc. So that's a different route. And then when you come out of that program, which is a combination of classroom knowledge, practical safety, and navigation or engineering application in the classroom, as well as simulation training. And then you also need to do internships of sea time aboard different vessels as part of that whole program. And then you will sit your exams with Transport Canada before you're certified. And then you go into more of what I would say an entry-level officer position, and you would continue to gain experience in sea time and challenge more examinations to keep moving up the ranks until you get up to captain. So it's actually a whole process, really, but there's opportunities to progress your career as you go along.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it, but definitely it sounds like there are many steps to go, but they are smaller incremental steps as opposed to big ones, right? I know that we're just nearing time, if not there. What I'd ask is for Antoine's question to be possibly answered within the chat here, or I'll leave that to either Julia or Anna to be able to eventually answer for Antoine if I can, because essentially that's all the time that we have at this point. Our next virtual presentation is going to take place this Thursday and the following Friday, December 6th, in 2 days. SD83 and BCIT will have a virtual seminar on clean and green technology and careers in the engineering sector. And in December, we'll have the Interior Designers of Canada. That'll be our guest to discuss opportunities in the interior design industry. If you wish to be involved in these sessions, please contact me at the email that is left there. I'm also just throwing in my text message or number and or phone number in the chat if you wish to be able to get hold of me in that respect. On behalf of CMCF, School District 83, Julia, the panelists, myself, thank you very much for attending and learning something about careers in the marine sector. Have a great day of learning. Cook's Jam and Ilie.